Have you ever come home to find your house completely gone? I bought a 2.3-acre lot through an estate sale. The previous owner had built 70% of a small house before he passed away. The paperwork was clean. The deed was recorded with the county. Everything was legitimate. 2 weeks later, I drove back to check on the property. The house was gone. Nothing left but the foundation and a pile of rubble. 3 people wearing uniforms that said HOA Enforcement stood in the middle of the debris, telling me they had conducted a lawful demolition of an unauthorized structure. 1 week after that, I received a subpoena. The HOA was suing me for $175,000. They destroyed my house. Then they sued me. That was the biggest mistake they ever made. Drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from, and if you enjoy stories about justice being served, hit subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. The property was supposed to be my fresh start. I had found it through an estate sale listing 2.3 acres of land with a partially completed house, sold by the family of a man named Gerald Morrison who had passed away 6 months earlier. Gerald had been building his retirement home when his heart gave out. The foundation was poured, the framing was done, the roof was on, 70% complete, according to the listing. The family wanted it gone quickly, and I had the cash from selling my condo in the city. The deal closed in 19 days. The deed was recorded with the county on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I drove out that same week to walk the property, took photographs of the structure, and made a list of contractors to call. Then I went back to the city to tie up loose ends before moving permanently. 2 weeks later, I returned. The drive took about 90 minutes through winding county roads, past farms and forest and the occasional gas station. I remember the weather was clear, the kind of spring morning that makes everything feel possible. I turned onto the gravel road that led to my property, already thinking about which contractor to call first, whether to prioritize the electrical or the plumbing. Then I came around the bend and saw it, or rather, I saw what was left of it. The house was gone, not damaged, not vandalized, gone. Where Gerald Morrison's retirement dream had stood 2 weeks ago, there was now nothing but a concrete foundation surrounded by piles of splintered wood, broken drywall, and twisted metal. Dust still hung in the air, the smell of diesel fuel mixed with fresh-cut lumber. 3 people stood in the middle of the debris. They wore matching navy blue uniforms with patches on the shoulders that read HOA Enforcement in bold yellow letters. 2 men and 1 woman. The woman held a clipboard and appeared to be directing the others. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair cut short, posture rigid with authority. When she saw my car pull up, she did not look surprised. She looked annoyed, like I was interrupting something important. I parked at the edge of the destruction and stepped out slowly, my phone already in my hand. I did not say anything at first. I just looked at the rubble that used to be my house, trying to process what I was seeing. The woman walked toward me, clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. "Are you the current owner of this parcel?" she asked. Her voice was clipped, professional, rehearsed. I told her yes, I was Daniel Brooks, and I had purchased this property 3 weeks ago. I asked her what had happened to my house. She nodded once, as if confirming something she already knew. "I'm Victoria Marsh, Chief Compliance Officer for Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association," she said. "This structure violated multiple community standards, setback requirements, architectural review protocols, and unapproved exterior materials. The HOA exercised its enforcement authority to remove the unauthorized construction." She said it the way someone might explain a parking ticket, routine, unremarkable. I asked if she had a court order authorizing the demolition. She tilted her head slightly. "The CC&Rs grant the association full enforcement authority over non-compliant structures. A court order is not required." I asked to see documentation the CC&Rs she referenced, the violation notices, the demolition order, anything that authorized what had been done to my property. Victoria glanced at her clipboard, then back at me. "All relevant documentation will be mailed to the address on file within 7 to 10 business days," she said. "In the meantime, I'm required to inform you that any attempt to rebuild without proper architectural approval will result in additional enforcement action." One of the men stepped closer. His uniform had a different patch, enforcement officer, and he wore a utility belt with something holstered on his hip. I could not tell if it was a weapon or a radio. His name tag said Russell Reyes. He did not speak, but his presence was clearly meant to intimidate. I did not give him the satisfaction of looking nervous. Instead, I raised my phone and began taking photographs of the rubble, the uniforms, the patches, the vehicles parked nearby with magnetic signs reading HOA Enforcement Unit. Victoria's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to stop recording. This is official HOA business." I told her I was standing on my own property, documenting damage to my own house, and I had every right to record. She exchanged a look with Russell Reyes, then turned back to me. "You'll be hearing from our legal department," she said. "I strongly advise you to consult an attorney before taking any further action." She turned and walked back to her vehicle, the two men following. I watched them drive away, their trucks kicking up dust on the gravel road. I stood there for a long time, surrounded by what used to be my house, trying to understand what had just happened. A voice came from behind me. "They finally got another one." I turned. An older man stood at the edge of the property line, maybe 70 years old, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots. He had the weathered look of someone who had lived in the country his whole life. I asked him what he meant. He shook his head slowly, looking at the debris. "That's the third house they've torn down in 2 years," he said. "Same story every time. New owner comes in, doesn't know the area, and then Victoria's crew shows up with their uniforms and their clipboards." I asked if anyone had ever fought back. He gave me a long look, something between pity and warning. A few tried, didn't end well for them. Victoria's got connections, lawyers, people at the county. Nobody wins against her. He turned to leave, then paused. "If I were you, I'd cut my losses, sell the land, get out before they make your life hell." I looked back at the foundation of my house. The concrete was still good. The permits Gerald Morrison had filed were still on record with the county. And something Victoria Marsh had said was already bothering me. She had mentioned CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the rules that govern homeowners associations. But when I had purchased this property, my title search had not mentioned any HOA, no covenants, no restrictions, no mandatory membership in anything. Either my title company had missed something catastrophic, or Victoria Marsh had just demolished my house based on authority she did not actually have. I took one more photograph of the debris, then got back in my car. I was not going to cut my losses. I was going to find out the truth. The county recorder's office opened at 8 in the morning. I was waiting in the parking lot at 7:45, a folder of documents on the passenger seat beside me. I had not slept much the night before. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pile of rubble where my house used to stand. But I was not tired, I was focused. The anger was there, somewhere deep in my chest. But I had learned a long time ago that anger without information is useless. Information is what wins fights. So I sat in that parking lot, reviewing my purchase documents, preparing a list of questions, and waiting for the doors to open. At exactly 8, I walked inside and approached the counter. The clerk was a woman in her 50s, with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. I told her I needed to research property records for a parcel I had recently purchased. She asked for the address and parcel number. I gave her both. She disappeared into a back room and returned 15 minutes later with a stack of documents and a computer printout. My deed was there, recorded and stamped, exactly as the title company had provided. No liens, no encumbrances, no clouds on the title. I asked her to pull the subdivision plat for the area, specifically anything related to the Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. She typed into her computer, frowned slightly, then pulled up a map on her screen and turned the monitor so I could see. The Meadowbrook Heights subdivision was clearly marked a cluster of 47 residential lots arranged around a central road, all within a surveyed boundary recorded 12 years ago. My parcel was adjacent to that boundary. Adjacent, but not inside it. My 2.3 acres sat just beyond the eastern edge of the subdivision, separated by a narrow strip of county land that had never been developed. According to the official records, my property was an unincorporated parcel. It had never been part of Meadowbrook Heights. It was not subject to their CC&Rs. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my land whatsoever. I asked the clerk to confirm this in writing. She printed a certified copy of the boundary map, stamped it with the county seal, and handed it to me. I asked one more question. Had any court orders been filed regarding my property address in the past year? Any demolition orders, enforcement actions, or liens from any homeowners association? She searched the database and shook her head. Nothing. No court had authorized anything. No judge had signed any order. Victoria Marsh had demolished my house without any legal authority at all. I thanked the clerk, paid for the certified copies, and walked out with something I had not had when I walked in proof. My next stop was the county building department. The permit that Gerald Morrison had filed for his house was still on record, still valid, with no stop work orders or violations attached. The inspector I spoke with pulled up the file and confirmed that the last inspection had been completed 8 months ago, before Gerald's death. Everything had passed. The structure met code. There was no legal reason for anyone to tear it down. I asked if the building department had received any complaints about the property from an HOA. The inspector checked his records and found nothing. No complaints, no reports, no communication from Meadowbrook Heights or anyone else. As far as the county was concerned, my house had been a lawful structure on private land until someone decided to turn it into rubble. I called the county code enforcement office from my car. A supervisor confirmed what I had already suspected. They had not issued any violation notices for my address, and they had no record of any enforcement action. More importantly, he explained something that Victoria Marsh had conveniently omitted. Even if a structure violated local codes, only county code enforcement or a court order could authorize demolition. A homeowners association had no legal power to tear down buildings. They could fine members. They could place liens on properties within their jurisdiction, but they could not demolish structures. That was not how the law worked. I asked the supervisor if there was a term for private citizens who destroyed property while claiming governmental authority. He paused for a moment. That would depend on the specifics, he said carefully. But if they represented themselves as having enforcement powers they did not possess, that could potentially be criminal impersonation. You might want to speak with the sheriff's office. I did. The deputy I spoke with at the non-emergency line was professional but cautious. He took down the details of what had happened: the uniforms, the patches, the magnetic signs on the vehicles, the claims of enforcement authority. He said he could not make any determination about criminal charges based on a phone call, but he noted that impersonating a peace officer was a serious offense in this state. So was criminal destruction of property. He suggested I file a formal complaint and preserve any evidence I had collected. I told him I had photographs and video from the scene. He gave me a case number and told me someone from the investigations unit might follow up. It was not a promise, but it was a start. I now had documentation from 3 separate county offices confirming that Victoria Marsh had no authority to do what she had done. The question was what to do with that information. The answer arrived in my mailbox 4 days later. A thick envelope from Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association, sent via certified mail. Inside was a document titled Notice of Violation and Assessment of Penalties. The violations listed were extensive unauthorized construction, failure to submit an architectural review application, failure to pay assessment fees, and obstruction of enforcement personnel. The total amount due was $47,500. Payable within 30 days. Failure to pay would result in a lien on my property and further legal action. At the bottom of the notice was a signature: Victoria Marsh, Chief Compliance Officer. I read the document 3 times, making sure I understood exactly what they were claiming. They had destroyed $85,000 worth of construction on land they had no jurisdiction over, and now they were demanding I pay them $47,000 for the privilege of having my house demolished. This was not a billing dispute. This was not a misunderstanding. This was extortion dressed in bureaucratic language, and I was not going to pay a single cent. I started building my file. Every photograph, every document, every recording, every certified copy, I was going to need all of it. The Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association held its monthly meetings on the 2nd Thursday of each month at 7 in the evening. The location was a community center about 2 miles from my property, a squat brick building with fluorescent lighting and folding chairs facing a long table at the front. I arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a folder with my certified county documents. Before I walked in, I confirmed that my phone was recording audio. This was a one-party consent state. Every word spoken in that room would be captured. About 20 residents sat in the folding chairs when I entered. most of them looking like they would rather be anywhere else. At the front table sat 5 people. I recognized Victoria Marsh immediately, same rigid posture, same silver hair, same expression of administrative contempt. A 5th person sat slightly apart, a man in his late 50s with thinning hair and a rumpled suit. His placard read, Harold Pence Legal Counsel. Victoria called the meeting to order at 7 and moved through budget updates and landscaping contracts in under 3 minutes. Then she reached the item I had been waiting for, new business violation disputes. She looked directly at me. Mr. Brooks, you may approach. I walked to the front of the room and placed my certified county boundary map on the table in front of her. I stated my case once, clearly. I had purchased the parcel 3 weeks ago. According to this document stamped and sealed by the county recorder, my property was an unincorporated parcel located outside the surveyed boundaries of the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision. The HOA, therefore, had no jurisdiction to assess violations, demand fees, or authorize demolition of any structure on my land. I stopped speaking and waited. Victoria did not pick up the document. She did not glance at it. She smiled thin, condescending, and folded her hands on the table. Mr. Brooks, I'm aware your parcel sits outside the original subdivision plat. That's not in dispute. She paused, letting the admission settle into the recording. However, your property falls within our community service area. All structures visible from community roads are subject to architectural review under our expanded governance protocols. I asked her to point to where community service area, or expanded governance protocols, appeared in the recorded CC&Rs. She waved her hand. County records reflect what was filed 12 years ago. Our community has evolved. Harold Pence straightened in his chair and spoke with the rehearsed confidence of a man who had delivered this explanation before. The Architectural Committee has jurisdiction over all visible structures within the community viewshed, he said. This is a well-established principle of community governance, recognized in numerous state and federal court rulings. The visual corridor doctrine supersedes parcel boundaries when community aesthetic standards are at stake. He delivered this as settled law, his tone implying that questioning it would be embarrassing for me. I asked him to cite the specific statute or case law establishing viewshed jurisdiction over non-member properties. Harold Pence blinked. He shuffled his papers. That's a complex legal question. I'd be happy to provide a written explanation at a later date. I asked for his state bar number so I could verify his credentials and review his written explanation properly. The room went silent. Harold's face tightened. I don't see how that's relevant to this proceeding. He did not provide the number. Victoria cut in before I could press further. Mr. Brooks, you have 30 days to pay the assessed fees of $47,500. If you fail to do so, we will file a lien on your property and pursue legal action. I asked what would happen if I refused to recognize the HOA's authority over land that was not part of the HOA. Victoria's smile did not waver. Then we will refer the matter to our enforcement partners for additional action. I asked, who are these enforcement partners? She tilted her head slightly, her voice dropping just enough to make the next words land like a threat rather than an answer. You'll find out if you don't comply. The room stayed silent. 20 residents stared at their hands, their phones, the floor anywhere but at me or at Victoria. No one spoke. No one objected. No one asked what additional action meant. They already knew, or they were too afraid to find out. I thanked the board for their time and returned to my seat. The meeting continued for another 10 minutes, but the atmosphere had changed. Victoria's voice remained steady, but the board members beside her sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact with each other. These were not co-conspirators. These were people trapped in something they did not know how to escape. When the meeting adjourned, I walked to the parking lot with my folder tucked under my arm. I was almost to my car when footsteps approached from behind. I turned. One of the board members, a woman in her late 40s with worried eyes, had followed me outside. Her placard had identified her as Grace Harris, the secretary. She glanced back at the community center, then moved closer and spoke quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. You need to be careful. Victoria has connections people at the county, people you wouldn't expect. I asked her to be more specific. She shook her head, her hands trembling slightly. There was a man named Castillo. About 2 years ago, he challenged her like you're doing. They went after him: lawsuits, liens, pressure from every direction. He sold his property just to make it stop, lost almost everything. I asked if she knew where Castillo was now. Grace's eyes darted toward the building. I don't know, but if you find him, he'll tell you what you're really dealing with. She turned and walked quickly back toward the community center without another word. I stood alone in the parking lot, the evening air cool against my face. Victoria Marsh had admitted on the recording that my property was outside the subdivision plat, then asserted authority anyway. Harold Pence had claimed a legal doctrine he could not cite and refused to provide his bar credentials. And now I had a name: Stephen Castillo, someone who had fought back and lost, someone who knew how this operation worked from the inside. I got into my car, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. Grace Harris had told me to be careful, but careful was not going to stop Victoria Marsh. I needed to find Stephen Castillo before they figured out I was looking. I found Stephen Castillo 3 days later, 40 miles from Meadowbrook Heights, working maintenance for a property management company. When I called and explained who I was, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I wondered when someone else would call. We agreed to meet, but that meeting would have to wait." The morning after I found his number, I drove to my property with a contractor to assess the foundation and clear the debris. 4 vehicles were parked in a line across the entrance to my land. 3 pickup trucks with HOA enforcement magnetic signs. Victoria Marsh's silver SUV. 8 people stood in formation near the rubble pile. Victoria watched my car approach like she had been expecting me. I parked on the road and stepped out. My contractor, Bill Patterson, parked behind me. Victoria walked toward us before we could take 3 steps. "Mr. Brooks, this property is currently designated as an active enforcement zone under HOA Enforcement Code Section 12.4. No unauthorized personnel or work crews are permitted until the compliance matter is resolved." She said it like she was citing a federal statute. I told her this was my property, that I had a recorded deed, and that no HOA code superseded state property law. Victoria shook her head slowly. Section 12.4 grants the association authority to restrict access to non-compliant properties pending resolution. Your contractor will need to leave immediately. She turned to her enforcement team. "If they don't leave in 5 minutes, we'll have them removed." One of the enforcement officers stepped forward, Russell Reyes. His hand drifted to his hip and rested on something holstered at his belt. The shape was unmistakable. I kept my voice steady. "Is that a firearm?" Russell did not blink. "Enforcement personnel are authorized to carry for protection during compliance operations." I looked at Victoria. "Your private security is armed on my property while preventing me from accessing it. You understand that's multiple felonies." Victoria's smile held. "Mr. Reyes is acting within the scope of his duties. I suggest you leave before this becomes more complicated." I took out my phone and dialed 911. I reported armed individuals claiming enforcement authority were blocking access to my private property. The dispatcher said deputies were on the way. Victoria's smile disappeared. Neighbors began appearing at the edges of their properties. First 2, then 5, then 8, phones out, doorbell cameras are active. The entire scene was being recorded from multiple angles. When the sheriff's cruiser appeared on the gravel road, Victoria straightened her posture and prepared to perform. 2 deputies stepped out, a man and a woman, both with the careful demeanor of officers entering an unknown situation. The male deputy approached Victoria first. "Ma'am, we received a report of armed individuals blocking access to private property. Can you explain what's happening here?" Victoria launched into her explanation with practiced confidence: enforcement authority, compliance dispute, restricted access protocols. She made it sound routine. The deputy listened without expression. "Do you have credentials?" Victoria produced a laminated card from her clipboard. The deputy examined it for 2 seconds. "Ma'am, this is not a law enforcement credential. This does not authorize you to restrict access to private property or to detain anyone." He turned to Russell Reyes. "Sir, are you carrying a firearm?" Russell nodded. "Do you have a concealed carry permit issued by this state?" Silence. The deputy's voice hardened. "I'm advising you to leave this property immediately. Mr. Brooks has documentation showing legal ownership of this land. Whatever dispute exists needs to be resolved through civil courts, not by armed obstruction. If we receive another call, We will take enforcement action, and I will personally ensure charges are filed for unlawful restraint and criminal trespass." Victoria's face was rigid. "This isn't over. You'll be hearing from our attorneys." She turned and walked to her SUV. Her team followed in disarray. Russell Reyes was the last to leave. Bill Patterson assessed the foundation that afternoon. The concrete was sound. Rebuilding was possible, but I did not get to think about rebuilding for long. 3 days later, a process server appeared at my door with a thick envelope. The Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association was suing me in civil court. The complaint demanded $175,000 across 3 causes of action: $50,000 for unauthorized construction damages, $75,000 for interference with lawful enforcement, and $50,000 for emotional distress inflicted on HOA personnel. The numbers were absurd. The house they demolished had been worth $85,000. They were claiming more than double that in damages for destroying my property. The attorney of record was Harold Pence. That night, I searched the State Bar website. Harold Pence's license had been suspended 18 months ago for client trust account violations. He was not authorized to practice law. He was not authorized to file lawsuits. And he had just signed his name to a complaint in civil court demanding $175,000 from the person whose house his clients had illegally demolished. The lawsuit was not just frivolous, it was fraud. I met Stephen Castillo at a diner halfway between his apartment and Meadowbrook Heights. He was a man in his late 50s with tired eyes and calloused hands, someone who had worked hard his entire life and had nothing to show for it except lessons learned the hard way. He ordered coffee and did not touch it. He just talked. 2 years ago, he had purchased a small lot adjacent to the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision. He built a storage shed for his landscaping equipment. Within a month, Victoria Marsh and her enforcement team showed up, declared the shed a non-compliant structure, and demolished it while he was at work. When he threatened to sue, the HOA sued him first $90,000 in damages for unauthorized construction and community aesthetic violations. He could not afford a lawyer. He settled for $35,000 just to make it stop. They made him sign a non-disclosure agreement as part of the settlement. "I've kept everything," Stephen said. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs of his demolished shed, copies of the violation notices, the settlement agreement, and a canceled check made out to Meadowbrook Heights HOA. They told me I could never talk about this, but I don't care anymore. I lost my business because of what they did. I want them stopped. I asked if he knew of other victims. He nodded slowly. "There have been at least 5 or 6 others since I settled. Same pattern every time. New owner, demolition, lawsuit, settlement. Victoria calls it community protection. Everyone else calls it extortion." I thanked him for his courage and told him I would be in touch. His evidence was exactly what I needed: proof of a pattern, proof of intent, proof that what happened to me was not an isolated incident but part of a systematic operation. The next day, I hired an attorney. Her name was Olivia Carter, and she specialized in HOA disputes and property rights litigation. She had spent 8 years at the State Attorney General's office before going into private practice. And she had a reputation for not backing down from fights that other lawyers considered too risky. I brought her everything: my county documents, my recordings from the HOA meeting, the photographs and videos from the confrontation, the police report, Stephen Castillo's folder, and the lawsuit that Harold Pence had filed against me. She reviewed the materials for over an hour without speaking. When she finally looked up, her expression was grim but focused. "This isn't just civil overreach," she said. "This is criminal, multiple felonies. And if Harold Pence filed this lawsuit with a suspended license, that's fraud upon the court." She started making a list. We had work to do. Olivia filed a motion to dismiss the HOA's lawsuit on grounds of lack of jurisdiction. The motion was straightforward. My property was outside the recorded boundaries of the subdivision, and therefore the HOA had no legal authority to assess violations, demand fees, or claim damages. She attached certified copies of the county boundary map, my deed, and the original CC&Rs showing the precise limits of the HOA's jurisdiction. Under court rules, the HOA had 21 days to respond with evidence supporting their claim of authority over my property. We were betting that they would overreach. We were right. On the 19th day, The HOA filed its response. Attached was a document titled Amended Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, allegedly adopted 6 years ago. According to this document, the HOA's jurisdiction had been expanded to include all parcels within the community service area and visual corridor. My property was specifically listed as falling within this expanded boundary. Olivia called me that evening. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the edge of anticipation beneath it. They submitted forged documents to the court, she said. I need you to come to my office first thing tomorrow. This changes everything. I was there at 8 in the morning. She had the amended CC&Rs spread across her desk alongside the original version recorded with the county. She walked me through the discrepancies one by one. First, the amended document claimed to have been signed and notarized on March 15, 2018. But the notary whose stamp appeared on the document had not received her commission until September of that year, 6 months after she supposedly witnessed the signatures. Second, the font used in the amendment headers was Calibri Light, a typeface that was not released until 2019. The document could not have been created in 2018. Third, the parcel numbers referenced in the expansion clause did not match the county's numbering system. They used a format that the county had only adopted in 2021. The amended CC&Rs were not just fraudulent, they were incompetently fraudulent, created recently and backdated clumsily by someone who did not understand how document forensics worked. Victoria Marsh and Harold Pence had submitted fabricated evidence to a court of law in an attempt to establish jurisdiction that they never had. That was not a civil violation. That was a felony. Olivia filed 3 documents that afternoon. First, a motion for sanctions against the HOA and its counsel for submitting fraudulent documents. Second, a formal referral to the district attorney's office requesting a criminal investigation for fraud, forgery, and perjury. Third, a complaint to the state bar detailing Harold Pence's unauthorized practice of law and his submission of forged documents while representing clients in litigation. She also made a phone call to a journalist she knew who covered HOA abuse stories for a regional news outlet. The journalist was very interested. Victoria Marsh's response came within 48 hours, but it was not directed at the court. It was directed at the community. Posts appeared on local forums and neighborhood apps calling me a dangerous individual who was threatening community safety and again harassing HOA volunteers. The language was inflammatory and personal, accusing me of intimidation, stalking, and making violent threats against Victoria and her family. None of it was true. All of it was documented. I screenshot everything before it could be deleted. Olivia added it to our file evidence of defamation, evidence of retaliation, evidence that Victoria Marsh was willing to destroy someone's reputation rather than face accountability for her crimes. But it was too late. The forged documents were already with the court. The referral was already with the DA. The state bar complaint was already under review. Victoria had spent years building an operation based on intimidation and the assumption that her victims would never fight back. She had grown so confident in her own impunity that she had submitted obviously fabricated evidence to a judge, believing that no one would check. She had miscalculated. The trap was set. Now we waited for the system to close it. The state bar moved faster than I expected. 11 days after Olivia filed her complaint, Harold Pence received official notification that an investigation had been opened into his unauthorized practice of law. The letter informed him that practicing with a suspended license was a criminal offense in this state, punishable by up to 2 years in prison, within 48 hours. Harold Pence filed a notice of withdrawal as attorney of record for Meadowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. He cited irreconcilable differences with the client as his reason. He did not mention the forged documents he had submitted to the court. He did not mention the state bar investigation. He simply disappeared from the case, leaving Victoria Marsh without legal representation in the middle of active litigation. Olivia told me that Victoria had contacted 6 different law firms in the region, trying to find replacement counsel. All 6 declined. Word travels fast in small legal communities, and no attorney wanted to inherit a case built on fabricated evidence and criminal exposure. 3 weeks after the state bar notification, I received a phone call from the district attorney's office. An investigator named Thompson wanted to meet with me to discuss the referral Olivia had submitted regarding the forged CC&Rs. I agreed immediately. The meeting took place in a windowless conference room at the county administrative building. Thompson was a man in his early 50s, with the deliberate manner of someone who had spent decades building cases piece by piece. He had a file in front of him that was already 3 inches thick. He did not waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Brooks, we've received your attorney's referral regarding document fraud," he said, "but I want you to know your case is not the only complaint we've received about this organization. We've been watching Meadowbrook Heights HOA for almost 2 years. Your evidence may be what we needed to move forward." He asked me to walk him through everything from the beginning. I did the purchase, the demolition, the confrontation, the meeting, the armed blockade, the lawsuit, the forged documents. I provided copies of every piece of evidence I had collected. Thompson took notes without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said something that confirmed what I had suspected. "The man who confronted you with the firearm, Russell Reyes, we ran his background after the sheriff's report came in. He has a prior felony conviction for aggravated assault from 12 years ago. Under state law, he's prohibited from possessing firearms. Carrying a weapon during what he called an enforcement operation means he's looking at felon in possession charges, potentially with enhancement for commission during another crime." I asked what other crimes were being considered. Thompson's expression remained neutral. Document fraud, extortion, criminal impersonation, destruction of property. "We're still building the case, but your documentation has been extremely helpful." Olivia filed our countersuit the following week. The complaint named 5 defendants: Victoria Marsh, Harold Pence, Russell Reyes, and 2 other enforcement team members who had participated in the demolition of my house. The causes of action were comprehensive destruction of property seeking $85,000 for the value of the demolished structure, criminal trespass, fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and civil rights violations for acting under color of law without legal authority. The total damages sought exceeded $300,000 when accounting for punitive damages and attorney fees. Olivia had also reached out to Stephen Castillo and 2 other victims who had come forward after hearing about my case. They were considering joining a consolidated action. The HOA's enforcement fund, which Victoria had built through years of coerced settlements, was about to become the source of restitution for the people she had victimized. The journalist Olivia had contacted and published her story 4 days after we filed the countersuit. The headline read, "HOA Enforcement Team Accused of Destroying Homes, Forging Documents in Years-Long Scheme." The article included interviews with Stephen Castillo and 2 other former victims, photographs of demolished structures, and excerpts from court filings detailing the forged CCNRs. Victoria Marsh had been contacted for comment. Her statement called the allegations a coordinated attack by disgruntled former residents who refused to comply with community standards. She did not address the forged documents. She did not address Russell Reyes's felony record. She did not address Harold Pence's suspended license. The comment section beneath the article is filled with dozens of people sharing their own experiences with aggressive HOA enforcement, not just from Meadowbrook Heights, but from communities across the state. Victoria Marsh had built her operation on the assumption that her victims would stay silent. That assumption was collapsing. The hearing on our motion to dismiss was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late spring. Victoria had finally found an attorney willing to take her case, a solo practitioner from out of state who specialized in community association defense. His first act was to file a motion to dismiss the HOA's own lawsuit without prejudice, which would have allowed Victoria to refile later without consequence. Olivia opposed the motion immediately. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs do not get to submit forged documents to this court, face referral to the district attorney for criminal fraud, and then simply walk away without prejudice," she argued. "They initiated this litigation to intimidate my client. They manufactured evidence to support claims they knew were false. Dismissal with prejudice is the minimum appropriate sanction." The judge, a woman in her 60s who had clearly reviewed the file carefully, asked Victoria's new attorney a simple question. "Counsel, can you explain why your client submitted CCNRs with a notary stamp dated 6 months before the notary received her commission?" Victoria's attorney had no answer. He asked for a continuance to investigate the document's origins. The judge denied the request. She scheduled an evidentiary hearing for the following month, ordered all parties to appear in person, and warned that sanctions for filing fraudulent documents were being actively considered. Victoria sat in the gallery throughout the proceedings, her face a mask of controlled fury. She did not speak. She did not look at me. When the hearing concluded, she walked out of the courtroom without acknowledging anyone. Her attorney followed, already on his phone, probably reconsidering whether this case was worth the trouble. I stayed seated for a moment, processing what had just happened. The system was working, not quickly, not dramatically, but methodically. The evidence I had gathered was becoming a noose, and Victoria Marsh had tied it around her own neck. The evidentiary hearing took place on a Tuesday morning in early summer. The courtroom was fuller than I had expected. Stephen Castillo sat in the second row, along with two other victims who had come forward after the news story. A journalist from the regional outlet occupied a seat near the back, notebook open. Several neighbors from Meadowbrook Heights had driven in to watch, some out of curiosity, others because they had lived under Victoria Marsh's authority for years and wanted to see how it ended. Victoria herself sat at the defendant's table with her out-of-state attorney, wearing a navy blazer and an expression of rigid composure. Harold Pence was notably absent. His empty chair spoke louder than any testimony could. The judge entered at 9 sharp, the same woman who had denied the continuance request at the previous hearing. She wasted no time. Olivia presented our evidence methodically. First, the certified county records established that my property was an unincorporated parcel outside the HOA's recorded boundaries. Second, the original CC&Rs filed with the county, showing the precise limits of Meadowbrook Heights jurisdiction. Third, the amended CC&Rs that Victoria's team had submitted the documents that claimed to expand their authority to include my land. Then she called her first witness, a forensic document examiner named Dr. Patricia Holloway, who had spent 23 years analyzing questioned documents for courts and federal agencies. Dr. Holloway walked the judge through her findings with clinical precision. The notary stamp on the amended CC&Rs bore a commission number that was not issued until September 2018, 6 months after the document was supposedly signed. The font used in the headers was Calibri Light, which was not publicly available until 2019. The parcel numbers referenced in the expansion clause used a format that the county had only adopted in 2021. Her conclusion was unambiguous. The amended CC&Rs could not have been created before 2021 at the earliest. They had been fabricated and backdated. The county recorder testified next, confirming that no amendments to the Meadowbrook Heights CC&Rs had ever been filed with her office. The original documents remained the only legally recorded version. Whatever expanded jurisdiction Victoria claimed simply did not exist in any official record. Victoria's attorney attempted to argue that the discrepancies were clerical errors, that the documents had been created in good faith based on board resolutions that were never properly recorded. The judge cut him off mid-sentence. "Counsel, your client submitted documents to this court with fabricated dates, impossible notary stamps, and references to systems that did not exist at the time of alleged creation. That is not a clerical error. That is fraud." She turned to Victoria. "Ms. Marsh, I'm going to allow you to explain. Do you wish to take the stand?" Victoria's attorney advised against it. Victoria ignored him. She walked to the witness stand with the bearing of someone who still believed she could talk her way out of anything. Olivia approached for cross-examination. "Ms. Marsh, did you have a court order authorizing the demolition of Mr. Brooks's house?" Victoria lifted her chin. "The CC&Rs grant the association enforcement authority over non-compliant structures. A court order was not required," Olivia nodded. "And where in the recorded CC&Rs does it state that the HOA has authority over properties outside the subdivision boundary?" Victoria hesitated. "Our expanded governance protocols?" "I'm asking about the CC&Rs recorded with the county, Ms. Marsh, the legal document, not internal protocols." Another hesitation. "The recorded CC&Rs reflect the original boundaries, but the community has evolved. We believed our authority extended to visible properties within the service area." Olivia let the word hang in the air. "Believed, but you never verified with the county. You never obtained a court order. You never confirmed that my client's property was actually subject to your rules." Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "That's the attorney's job. Harold handled the legal questions." "Harold Pence," Olivia said. The attorney whose license was suspended 18 months before he filed this lawsuit on your behalf. Victoria did not respond. Olivia turned to the judge. Your Honor, Ms. Marsh has admitted under oath that she demolished a structure on property she believed, but never verified was under her jurisdiction. She relied on an attorney she knew or should have known was not licensed to practice. And her organization submitted fabricated documents to this court in an attempt to manufacture authority they never possessed. The judge had heard enough. She delivered her ruling from the bench without recessing. The HOA's lawsuit against me was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could never be refiled. She imposed sanctions of $25,000 against Victoria Marsh personally for filing a frivolous lawsuit supported by fraudulent evidence. She confirmed that the referral to the district attorney for criminal investigation would proceed. And she ordered that my countersuit against Victoria, Harold Pence, Russell Reyes, and the other defendants would move forward to trial unless a settlement was reached. Victoria sat motionless as the ruling was read. Her attorney gathered his papers quickly, already calculating his exit strategy. When the judge adjourned, Victoria stood and walked toward the door without speaking to anyone. A journalist intercepted her in the hallway. Ms. Marsh, do you have any comment on the criminal investigation? Victoria's voice was flat, mechanical. This is a witch hunt. We were protecting our community from people who don't respect standards. Her attorney pulled her away before she could say more. I remained in the courtroom for a moment, watching the gallery empty. Stephen Castillo stopped beside me on his way out. I never thought I'd see this day, he said quietly. Thank you for not giving up. I told him it was not over yet. The civil case still had to be resolved. The criminal investigation was just beginning, but for the first time since I had driven up to that pile of rubble where my house used to stand, I felt something that resembled justice taking shape. The DA investigator appeared at my side as I was leaving. Mr. Brooks, we'll be in touch. This hearing gave us everything we needed to move forward with charges. I asked what came next. He smiled slightly. Now we let the system finish what you started. The indictments came down 6 weeks after the evidentiary hearing. Victoria Marsh faced charges for fraud, filing false documents, and criminal destruction of property. Harold Pence was charged with unauthorized practice of law. Russell Reyes faced felon in possession of a firearm with enhancement for impersonating a peace officer. 2 other enforcement team members were charged with trespass and property destruction. All 5 were arrested within 24 hours of the indictments being unsealed. Victoria's mugshot appeared in the regional news that evening. Same silver hair, same rigid posture, but the administrative contempt was gone. She looked like someone who had finally run out of room to maneuver. The civil case settled before the criminal trials began. Victoria's insurance carrier refused to cover intentional acts, leaving her and her co-defendants personally exposed. The final settlement totaled $185,000 paid from the HOA's enforcement fund. The same account Victoria had built through years of coerced settlements now compensated her victims. Stephen Castillo and 2 others filed their own lawsuits shortly after. Within months, the fund she had weaponized for years was depleted entirely. There was a certain symmetry to that. The tool of intimidation became the instrument of restitution. The criminal trials concluded the following spring. Victoria Marsh pleaded no contest to fraud and filing false documents. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in state prison, 3 years probation, and permanently barred her from serving in any HOA leadership capacity. Harold Pence's law license was revoked permanently. Russell Reyes went to trial, lost, and received 3 years for the firearm charge with enhancement. The others received probation and restitution orders. The system had processed them all, not dramatically, but thoroughly. Every participant faced consequences proportional to their role. That was enough. The remaining Meadowbrook Heights board members dissolved the enforcement program unanimously. An independent audit revealed more than $340,000 had flowed through Victoria's fund over 6 years, most of it extracted from property owners who never should have been targeted. The audit findings were forwarded to the state attorney general. A legislator introduced a bill requiring court orders before any HOA could take action against property. Whether it would pass remained uncertain, but the conversation had started. Victoria Marsh had operated for years in silence. Now her methods were being examined under lights she could not control. I rebuilt my house, It took 8 months quiet work, done properly this time. No one from Meadowbrook Heights came near my property line. When it was finished, I stood on the front porch and looked out at the land that had cost so much to keep. The trees moved in the afternoon breeze. The foundation Gerald Morrison had poured before his heart gave out now supported something complete. Grace Harris stopped by a few weeks after I moved in. She brought a bottle of wine and said what she had been carrying for months. I should have spoken up sooner. We all should have. I told her that silence was how people like Victoria won. Speaking was how we stopped them. She nodded and did not stay long. Some lessons take time to settle. Stephen Castillo called me the day Victoria reported to prison. He did not say much, just that he had watched the news coverage and wanted me to know it meant something to him, that someone had finally held her accountable. I told him the truth. I had not done anything extraordinary. I had checked the records. I had documented what happened. I had trusted the system to do its job when given the evidence it needed. The system was slow, frustrating, and imperfect, but it worked. Not because it was designed to favor people like me, but because it was designed to respond to proof. Victoria Marsh had built her operation on the assumption that no one would verify her claims. She had confused confidence with authority and intimidation with power. She was wrong. I think about that sometimes, the difference between power that depends on people not checking and power that survives scrutiny. Victoria controlled Meadowbrook Heights for years because her victims did not know where to look. They saw uniforms and clipboards and official-sounding language, and they assumed it was real, but none of it was recorded with the county. None of it would have survived 5 minutes in front of a judge who asked for documentation. Her entire operation was built on the gap between appearance and verification. I closed that gap, not with anger, not with confrontation, with records, timestamps, and certified copies. The legal system did not care about my feelings. It cared about evidence, and evidence was something I could provide. The house is quiet now. The land is mine legally, officially, permanently. No one will ever stand at my gate again and claim authority they do not possess. Victoria Marsh is serving her sentence. Harold Pence will never practice law again. Russell Reyes is behind bars. The enforcement fund is empty. And I am sitting on a porch that exists because I refuse to accept a lie dressed in bureaucratic language. Some people believe power comes from intimidation. I believe it comes from documentation. In the end, the difference is simple. Intimidation requires compliance. Documentation only requires truth. I had the truth. That was enough.